Dee, I want to thank you for joining me here on SPOLITICS. I'm going to start this podcast by asking you a question I ask every guest that appears on SPOLITICS, and that is name an athlete or a moment that made you love sports.
Easily. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here on SPOLITICS. Second, if I had to answer the question, Muhammad Ali. I'm in law school. I'm a second-year law school student. We're studying criminal procedure. And one day, in walks Muhammad Ali to our class. And my law professor had clerked for Thurgood Marshall. And at the time, Ali, at least one of his houses, was in Charlottesville. So we were studying the Supreme Court and procedural things on making their way up into the Supreme Court. And in walks Muhammad Ali as a guest speaker. And I don't know if I've ever been speechless. Just utterly speechless. So he told the story of, him being criminally prosecuted for asserting his religious preference for not going to the draft. And then the law professor then took it from the procedural ways that this thing ended up working in and out of the court. And the punchline is at the end, the Supreme Court's per curiam decision was really a procedural decision. They didn't really weigh in on whether they believed that he legitimately exercised his religious preference or not because they didn't have the votes. But what they did have the votes for was that there was a violation of procedure. And that convergence of somebody as iconic and brave and, as an athlete, I would make an argument, I think you can make a pretty good argument that easily the most quintessential, most important athlete in American history, I would say, is Muhammad Ali. So to be there on that day and have all of that converge with like a dorky law school student, learning procedure, hands down, that's my favorite athlete and favorite moment.
Now, I don't know how much you thought about this as you were beginning your law career, but did you ever look at being a lawyer and sort of marry that with activism?
Absolutely. I just had this blessing in law school, more dorky than you ever want to know. But when I was in law school, there was this battle between sort of the right-wing fundamentalist, Scalia crowd. And at the time, there was another sort of train of thought in the law called the critical legal studies movement. And that was sort of a Harvard-based movement about, the law should be working to make things more fair, to right wrongs, and that you have to understand that the law and the way that the law is developed, over the almost 250 years, a whole lot of decisions about race and class and gender went into deciding what the law was going to be. And so at that time, at UVA, there was just like healthy battle between these folks. So I was blessed because I was literally taught that way. When you step away, my family leaves the Jim Crow South, and my dad, goes through whatever he goes through. My mom goes through whatever they go through. They both are products of segregated schools, segregated trade schools, predominantly segregated colleges. I just never thought that the law was anything other than it's about making sure that justice was fair. So for me, I was probably a little more conservative than my parents growing up. So by the time I would come home, man, they would the dinner table was, a blood sport of me trying to there's this constitutionalist argument. And my parents were like, so which one of the slave owners do you think? Yeah. So and I look back on it now, and it's the best education I could have. One that was great in school, and one where I could come home, and my parents just never spared truth. And I gave them the first copy of Turf Wars yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
My dad is 95, and my mother's 91.
What a blessing.
A complete blessing.
Yeah, that's a big blessing.
A complete blessing.
So, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Because I had an opportunity to read Turf Wars, and I'm not sure what I expect. I guess whenever people of your position, you having served, 14 years?
14 years.
14 years as executive director of the, NFL Players Association. I guess you always expect the transparency to have its limits.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Can't say that's the case with your book.
No, there's no limits.
Yeah, because I'm in the first 10 pages. I'm like, oh, this is where we are right now, where you are being incredibly transparent and very honest about the NFL power dynamics, about NFL owners, particularly Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft, about Roger Goodell. I mean, you really laid bare your experiences. So why did you want to be this transparent, especially about this league?
Yeah, I think it was important for me to write a book that wasn't a football book. And in some respects better than others, that the sports industry on one hand is fantastic because we get to spend time, facilitating or watching or supporting great athletes doing things that we wish we could do. The fact that it brings, it does bring America together. But the reality is, for good, and I honestly say, and for bad, sport is the cultural center of America. And I'm a big believer in sport, but I think that it can only have a meaningful cultural relevance if we're true about it. And while I love football, I happen to love the players better, but I felt it was important to tell a story that was kind of based in truth. And it doesn't mean that we are indicting sport or indicting the NFL, but the plantation mentality is a real one. And I decided, instead of just saying that, well, how about we just bring receipts? And the fact that race and class and gender permeates every part of American society, it does the same thing in sport. And so I think hopefully, if people want to get something good from Turf Wars, looking at sport as a microcosm of America is, I think, a healthy thing for us to do. And this idea that, you were talking earlier about, the law and our forefathers. Look, I think that there are some great things that our forefathers did coming up with the structure of the Constitution, ignoring the fact that many of them were slaveholding individuals who wanted to create a government that protected them. That's just the truth. So I don't think we have to be binary. Football is good, football is bad, the owners are good or the owners are bad. Most of them are bad. But I do think that we have to have an obligation to look at this truthfully, and then understand where everybody fits in it. Where do the players fit? Where does the press fit? And where does a union fit?
So I was struck by so many things about the way you wrote about the dynamics. Now, obviously, as somebody who grew up, in the South, as you did, and with your parents and the legacy of your family having been through what they had gone through, clearly you understood race and racism. But it seemed like during your time in dealing with these group of billionaires who don't want to be told what to do, who are, majority white, all right, that probably, at least what I could pick up from your book, that gave you a different sensibility about race. What was that?
When I think the sensibility, the change was you understand that is just a reality of America, and it is a given. And I think people like us are reminded that it's a given every day. When you come out of law school like I did, and you have a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's fantastic, and then you move into private practice, and it's fantastic, and at least in those environments, your relationship does change a little bit because, I had some tough judges, but I never appeared in front of a judge where I thought that they woke up in the morning about race and whether they were superior or inferior, and then went to bed thinking about race and class. I frankly, the clients that I represented in private practice, I mean, it wasn't like we were having a ton of private conversations with each other, but what I found in business was that at least in the courtroom and in most of the companies that I represented, there was a certain level of, okay, whatever we want to deal with, we're just going to deal with it like a business. And I thought that coming into the National Football League, especially the way that I did, I thought, okay, well, it'll be just like that. And it's not. It's the only place that I know of that, for the most part, doesn't run like a business. And the first 2 years was somewhat of a literally a bucket of cold water being splashed in your face, thinking, okay, this is an incredibly successful business. I mean, it's wildly successful, and I would argue, for a certain extent, it's successful in spite of itself. But you're talking about a business that adds, for the most part, $1 billion of revenue every year, regardless of anything. I mean, the only thing that even produced a hiccup was a worldwide pandemic. But wars, recessions, elections, nothing stops football. And when I came in, I thought, well, okay, then that must mean an incredibly group of principled people running it purely on business terms, devoid of emotion, devoid of personal thought, or it's not that. And the last thing I would say, Jemele, is there's only been 3 executive directors, well, 4. Well, anyway, there's only been 3.
We'll get to that. Don't worry. It's like, we'll get to that.
When I took over, there had only been 3. And Ed Garvey was still alive. Gene Upshaw, unfortunately, had passed away. I never knew Gene. I brought Ed back. The reason why I wanted to write Turf Wars is almost no one negotiates with 31 billionaires. I mean, no one. And I think, the more that it became clear to me that football was literally a microcosm of America, and then near the end of the book, it's almost if America is becoming a microcosm of the NFL. It just became the story that I thought I had to tell, frankly, in the same way that Marvin Miller told his story, in the same way that Malcolm X told his story. I think if we take these lessons to the grave, we do a disservice.
So when you were getting acclimated to being in this very powerful position as executive director, it seemed like you dealt with a lot of microaggressions and macroaggressions
Yeah.
from the owners. I'm struck by that one particular part. We talk about how the former Panthers owner, Jerry Richardson, called you uppity, which was like,
What?
it's like, they still using that one? Like,
Well, first of all, that was exactly my take. I was like, man, I mean, whoa, this is like a long way from Sanford and Son. I mean, like, what are we doing? Yeah, but again, this is a meeting where 10 owners are on one side of the table. I'm there with 10 players on the other side of the table, including Peyton Manning, which is hilarious for its own sense. But these are all grown people, and the meeting goes so sideways. And then on the way out, he turns to me and he says, well, there's no reason for you to be uppity. I'm like, well, first of all, what? I mean, I heard my parents talk about the word uppity, but, it's, I don't know, that's got to be at least 50 years.
You brought that retro one out, like, uppity. Like, who says that?
Who says that? I mean, I was like, well, boss, I couldn't. And, well, 2 things happened from that meeting that I thought were absolutely hilarious. That was the first one. The second one was Jerry Richardson and Peyton Manning get into a conversation where literally Jerry Richardson is so condescending and so mean to Peyton. And Peyton just literally just responds. He's just a nice guy. I mean, Jerry Richardson was asking him, does he understand a profit and loss statement? Does he understand what a balance sheet is? I mean, it was the most condescending conversation.
Was this, refresh my memory, was this a CBA?
CBA
Yeah, it was a
negotiation.
collective
I mean, and
bargaining.
just like to bring your whole audience in, I mean, it ended up on the cutting room floor the context of the meeting. But Roger and I had gotten together, and we kind of decided, okay, we've these meetings have not been great, but it's important to kind of show that we're trying to get something done. So we decided to have a meeting during the week of Super Bowl. We both know that nothing dramatic is going to come out of the meeting, but the whole idea is let's just bring our sides together. Let's show we're trying to get something done. Let's try to build some momentum. Fine. 5 minutes into a meeting that wasn't supposed to matter, it goes completely off the rails because Jerry Richardson decides to go on this screed about, players being poorly managed. They don't have an ability to manage their money. If they had the ability to manage their money like him, they would own teams. So now the meeting turns into what really should have been nothing. Okay, you've now turned me into a wild man. So I respond to that, and the whole meeting goes absolutely crazy. But again, forget the fact that he called me uppity. The players lost their minds on our side of the table that he was rude to Peyton Manning. I have never seen my group of guys so angry in my life. This is crazy. And I'm like, well, they called me a name.
You're like, I'm the uppity one.
I'm the
Really?
yeah. Oh, you disrespected him. You disrespected Peyton. I'm like, all right. Hey, let's everybody just take a deep breath. And that was the end of the meeting, and everybody walked out. But that was just a pure microaggression. And I guess going to, answering your first question about, this, you walk into this world and you expect it to be at least professional. The fact that someone would decide to drop that, to me on the way out of the meeting is just one of those, it's not even tactically smart. So, their willingness to engage in this, was sort of the first window into not only who they are, but the way in which they envision this as their kingdom. And everybody should be thankful just to be a part of it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, how soon? Obviously, things often get contentious when we're talking about labor unrest and the possibility of labor strife. But before that, how soon did you realize exactly how owners view players?
I would say probably it took about a year before they really became explicit about the way in which they thought of players as property. And I remember being stuck on a golf cart with Mike Brown, who even yesterday,
the owner of the Bengals,
yesterday during a press conference, where he's in a contract, fight with one of his first, second round draft picks, says, well, I'm not going to pay for a guy to sit in jail.
I thought it was it just me? But I was like, why did he immediately go to jail?
Why did you go straight to jail? He's a young man out of college who isn't in jail. As we would say, you went straight to 11, but that's the mentality. And whether it was sitting in a golf cart with Mike Brown or meeting Al Davis, they never missed the opportunity, I would say, after the first year or so, to remind me that the way that they thought about this was, no, this is ours. And this whole labor thing, and you're going to come in as kind of a strident union leader, you just need to remember that you're playing in our sandbox. So, almost after a year, it was clear to me that they never wanted to think about this as a partnership. They'll say whatever they want to say publicly, but privately and even in meetings, it would be a stretch to say that we would sit in meetings and they would be sort of conscientious negotiations. It was just we have this and we're going to do this until someone stops us. And literally that was the mentality that, you could now look at to what's going on in the country. It's, well, I mean, we know the Constitution says this, or we know the law says this, but we're just going to do this until someone stops us. And it's a pure power play. And it's almost an embracing or glorification that might makes right. And so, and I'll take this to my grave, that was the best thing for our players to see. Because even coming in when I was trying to, teach our guys about sort of the history of labor and management, not only in sports, but in the country, the labor management dynamic is always one that's contentious. It has to be contentious. But, players want to believe that, well, they would never really do anything bad to us because we're the players. It's not that they would never do anything bad to you. They just know you're fungible. And the sort of the best thing that ever happened was this sort of consistent, disrespectful way in which they would approach the players, their unwillingness to even engage in the beginning with sort of fair bargaining. It taught the players something that I couldn't teach them. And I think to a certain extent it's something that every player in every sport should understand.
One of the things you definitely talk about in your book is about how it was your practice. You went to every locker room in the NFL, as you said, trying to explain to the players, hey, here's what they think about you.
Yeah.
This is what you're fighting for, just kind of reminding them about things that are important. But the part that was eye-opening for me, and it seemed to be for you as well, and I'd love for you to tell me more about it, is that there seemed to be a level of naivety that existed among the players. Like if the owners have a plantation mentality, the players' mentality is they don't know that's the mentality that they have.
It's true. And I, I love the players. I probably spend more time defending them than I probably should. I think it's tough for them because for many of our guys, this is their first job. And I learned about labor and management from Jerry's Sub Shop, right? You have a bad day, at school, you might have a flat tire. Man, the dude at the restaurant does not care. Come in, do your hours, cook the pizzas, don't burn the food, leave. And you understand that. I think sometimes players think that this is just all a game and that, they're lucky to be able to play in college. They're thrilled to be able to play in college. And then they are good enough to now play in the pros. And I think that comes with a certain number of assumptions that few people challenge. And their assumption is, well, we're the players, so they're going to do everything to make us happy and keep us happy and pay us. No, in the NFL, you're the greatest players in the world. But, man, there's a ton of people just to replace you. And they're happy to replace you. And one of the reasons I would tell the story about Bill Radovich, the football player in the 1940s who goes off to serve his country in World War II, he comes back in 1945 after being an All-Pro. He plays 1 year more with the Detroit Lions. He finds out that his father's dying of cancer in California. And he says to the Detroit Lions owner, I want to move to a team in California to be closer to my dad. The Detroit Lions owner tells this All-Pro, if you don't sign again with the Lions, you'll never play for another NFL team. This guy was an All-Pro 4 years starter who was a war hero. No, they just want control. And there is a certain level of naivete that I think every player walks into until someone dispels them. And I felt that was my job because you can't have a strong union if you think that the owners or everything you have from a pension to 401k to health care to work rules, if you think all of those are fantastic magical gifts that the owners just give to you, no, they will not only take them all away, but you forget that that people went on strike for those things, and people lost their jobs fighting for those things, and you have now this obligation to play it forward. So, I never kind of shied away from being confrontational with my own guys because I'm going to tell you the truth, and maybe your agent won't, or maybe your coach won't, but I'm neither one of those cats. So you just have to understand just how rough this business is.
When you were executive director, you dealt with a lot. You had the CBA, you had Deflategate, you had Bountygate. You also had Colin Kaepernick's protest, which hard to believe. Next year will be 10 years since that happened. That was 2016, and it feels like when I was reading your book, I was like, "What? Did you ever have a time of peace?" Like what?
No,
it didn't seem like you did. No. I want to go especially to when Colin took the knee, because you go into that and into quite a bit of detail, giving people a lot of insight to what the owners were saying. Sort of the strategy there. At what point did you realize that his protest was going to be a bigger problem beyond just fans criticizing what he was doing? That it was going to be a problem with NFL owners?
Yeah. The second game. I ended up getting a call from one of our PR people saying that, for the second time, and this time he took a knee. And the backdrop to that is I had already been in a little bit of a mix when Rush Limbaugh was thinking about buying the St. Louis Rams at the time.
Which, until you brought it up in the book, I had completely forgot that happened. I was like, oh, that did happen. He did try to
Everybody
do that.
forgets. Yeah,
totally forgot that happened.
It was like ulcer number 36 for me. But, I'd already been through that with him, and that was, months, I think, after I got elected. And I was a little bit naive about that one. I just thought he would be a terrible owner because, for the most part, a terrible human being. But, once you layer in sort of the racial overtones, the things that he said about girls' basketball teams, the way in which he engaged with his fan base, when I put out a statement and said that, look, football brings us together. I think I said something like, football brings us together. We shouldn't have an owner who makes a living tearing people apart, which I thought, honestly, wasn't nearly as crazy as some of the other things I've ever said. But that sent a group of people into the stratosphere. So when we learned about the second kneeling, I just knew that there were going to be people who were going to jump on this for their own political, emotional framing. And, I gave a statement, I think, to Dave Zirin in The Nation that night, primarily to do two things. One, to tell Colin and everybody else, man, we're 1,000% behind our players. We're going to back our players. But also, this is the narrative. It's not anti-America. And within 2 days, I think, of being on a road trip, an owner came over to me and well, it just seems to me that, how can we possibly have somebody in the National Football League disrespecting the flag and disrespecting America? And it was like, that's not what this is, right? If anything, you want our guys being reverential, and you want our guys to be a part of their community, and you don't want our guys to believe that they are living in some alternate universe where they just play football and throw a ball. You guys do community service with players. We back a lot of charities. This is what you want. And that's when I knew nobody was interested. I'm going to paint all the owners and with a broad brush, but many of them were not interested in any of the lip service that they had previously talked about players being a part of the community and caring about their community. They were interested in the National Football League appearing to toe a certain political line.
Obviously Donald Trump inserted himself. He really ignited the flame of that. And everybody saw the locked arms and that brief moment of solidarity among NFL players. But fast forwarding past that, you said something interesting in your book that I hadn't thought of, that you thought Colin hurt himself by not allowing the 49ers to cut him. And for people who don't remember,
Yeah.
he decided not to stay there. He took the option to leave.
Yeah.
His thinking, as he
Yeah.
sort of explained, was that he wanted to get a start on free agency early.
Yeah.
My guess is he probably had no idea that he would never, wouldn't
Yeah.
play from then. But just explain why you thought that may not have been a great move for him.
Yeah, for me, I'm just a game strategy lawyer, right? And so, the protest, had certainly ignited everything. And to me, thinking 4, 5, 6 steps down the road, I had no doubt that the league was going to do everything to blackball him. No doubt.
When did you realize that?
The story about Bill Radovich in 1945, they blackballed a former war hero merely because he wanted to move to another team to be next to his dad. And he was a white guy. So the league is hell-bent on control, just control. And so, for the year that Colin was at the 49ers, he's got this option at the end of the year. I'm only thinking strategically about what builds the best collusion case down the road.
So even while he's still playing with the 49ers,
we know it's coming. I know it's coming.
You know it's coming. Okay.
I mean, I'm just a dorky lawyer to a certain extent. But so, the one thing that the one linchpin you want there is you want a team to appear to have cut you for your political stance, because that's a great piece of evidence in the collusion. And then you're going to get discovery of why would they cut a top-tier quarterback who had taken them to the Super Bowl. I mean, that narrative is a pretty powerful narrative if you want to portray that as the first domino of collusion. By not exercising that option, you lost that evidentiary linchpin. And I can understand, him wanting to get to free agency earlier, but, the option could have been taken. The 49ers might have just said, hey, look, thank you very much. But to me, tactically, the best proof of collusion would have been them cutting you for your, and we would have argued certainly that they were cutting you only for one reason, for your political stance. So, but look, I have to think about these things legally and tactically, and other people have to think about them about what's in their best interest.
Were you ever able to have that conversation with him?
His lawyers. We talked to his lawyers, but not him. I mean, being overly technical, once you're a represented party, you're a represented party.
Right.
There were a lot of things I look back on where I wish we would have had more conversations and more.
Well, as he was doing his protest, were you able to?
Yes.
Okay. Have any conversations with him?
Okay. And they weren't always as good as I thought they should be. When I want to talk to a player, I talk to a player. I typically don't go through their agent. I don't go through their handler. I just don't. I think this one was more difficult because of all sorts of things. And look, and I've represented people, and I always want my client not to talk to another lawyer. I get it. But, this one was tough because on one hand, I believe 100% that the role of the union was to not only defend his rights, but to make sure the country understood exactly what his message was and to push back on the false narrative that the league was presenting. And that wasn't just a Colin-focused thing. That's how I view every player in the National Football League, because my job is to create as much of a safe place as possible for our players to do whatever they want to do. And by the way, none of them interrupted a game. None of them stopped a game. None of them knelt, during a timeout. None of them went over to a referee and, certainly didn't walk up next to a reporter at the end of the game with a certain hat on, right? I mean, when
During
you
a
think
post-game interview on national TV.
right. So you think about when you juxtapose the league's reaction to Colin and the league's reaction to Joey Bosa. I mean, I don't have any other explanation for that than you've just made a decision of which political side of the fence you're going to be on, and you're going to use your power as an NFL owner to effectuate that. In
hindsight, when you look back, do you feel as if the players' union did enough for Colin?
I do, and here's why. It's still a union, and it's a democracy, and that sometimes means that there are far more constraints on what I can do or what I might want to do as a somewhat aggressive black man. It's still a union. And so, the frame that I've always tried to remind people of, we doubled up on our meetings with the teams that year to make sure that the inside of the locker rooms were conducive to people talking about their political beliefs or whatever. I mean, it should come as a surprise to no one that an NFL team is not your high school locker room. It's not your college locker room. It's far more similar to like the French Foreign Legion. I mean, you have a highly trained group of people who did not self-select each other. They're put there. And they all have a particular skill, and they're all asked to do that particular skill. That necessarily means that you have people from all across a political spectrum who skew, at least for the most part, a little bit religious right, who might have their own thoughts about a protest like that. I'm proud of the fact that despite everything that the owners did or tried to do, there was never dissension in our locker room. And that I'm really proud of because, and I think that has a lot to do, didn't have a lot to do with me, had a lot to do with the people who work at the union where, look, we would go to our team meetings and my job was, hey, look, man, what's going on? And it was important to me to make sure, I mean, look, this is their workplace. So in the same way that I wouldn't want someone to be at a workplace where they were fearing reprisal, I don't want anybody in our NFL workplace fearing like they either can't say something or can't express themselves. And so I thought we did a pretty good job of making sure that our players understood not only what Colin was doing, but understanding that this is your right. And your right to not be sort of slavishly forced to toe some political line. I mean, you can make the argument that the league wraps itself up in the red, white, and blue like no other league in the country. I wanted our players to understand that, man, you just work here. And to the extent that you can resist or make sure that your own voice is there and not always being a pawn in this politicalization of sport, because that's what it is, it's okay. And so, whether it was helping the Players Coalition, which we did, or to me, the work that we did helping guys who still wanted to kneel, yeah, I mean, I will use any means necessary to protect our guys.
When he decided, him and Eric Reed, I should say, decided to pursue a collusion case against the NFL.
Yep.
How winnable did you think that case was?
Okay, now you're asking me a privilege question.
Oh, is that a privilege question?
That's a privilege question.
What?
Well, I gotta be. I'm still. Yeah, I mean.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean, we were in with that collusion case, so and we represented them as well with their outside lawyers. Mm-hmm. So, I can say this without divulging privilege. everything in a lawsuit comes down to discovery, and talk about today, as we know from a recent collusion case. It just comes down to what, you find in the evidence of what people have said and what people have done. I can tell you this, I was looking forward to discovery.
Now the NFL settled, right? That just so everybody is aware what the outcome of that.
Yeah, it's settled.
They decided to settle prior to said discovery, which I know you weren't the only person who wanted to see what that would have actually looked like.
You and I both know sometimes you just need the white hot light of, what'd you say? What'd you do? Right?
Shame goes a long way.
A long way.
Since we're on the topic of collusion,
here we go.
I want to ask you, exactly what I want to ask you about. So to bring everybody up to speed, you filed a collusion case. When did you file this case exactly? It was
22 or 23.
Yes, it was one of those.
Yeah.
So this is all related to Deshaun Watson's contract.
Correct.
Which fully guaranteed $32 million given to him by the Browns.
Yep.
We know the kind of issues and allegations against Deshaun Watson.
Yep.
Most people consider that to be arguably the worst contract in NFL history. Not for Deshaun Watson, certainly. Some degree, not for the NFLPA either. So understand that.
God bless the owner.
Yes.
God bless you.
So he gets that contract,
right.
And then it seems like you begin to notice some patterns.
Yes.
After Deshaun Watson was given that contract. So take me through that part about what is it that made you file a collusion case against the NFL. Can you say?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can.
Really?
Okay, I can say this. Well,
okay.
We can't talk about what went into the legal thought to file the case.
Right, but what did you notice, or what did you?
Oh no, we can talk about what was public.
Okay.
I definitely remember when Steve Bisciotti came out after the Deshaun Watson contract, and I'm going to paraphrase, but words to the effect of, I think a fully guaranteed contract, was wasted on a guy like that. And look, can't talk about sort of the legal machinations that led to it, but that statement alone, as a standalone statement, I mean, three things pop out, immediately. First, why would any other owner say anything about another owner's decision to hire a person? I mean, I've been in this business for a long time. I don't remember another owner commenting on another owner's contract. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So I have a hard time believing that it was a mistake. Number two, I have a hard time, when he says, a fully guaranteed contract going for a person like that. Okay, my next question is going to be, when you say like that, Deshaun didn't play for a year, but the year before he played, it was lights out. So, this was a high-performing player while he was in Houston. So what part of like that are we talking about? Because I thought that these contracts were based on how well you perform on the field. And by the way, if he violated some sort of league policy or had engaged in some sort of crime or something else, none of those were the case for Deshaun Watson at that point. He didn't get punished by the league until after. Now, the third thing is, well, if you don't think that a fully guaranteed contract is worthy of a guy like that, then who should deserve one? Maybe it's, I don't know, your quarterback. So, I can remember being struck by that for those three reasons. And, jumping forward, yes, I authorized the filing of the collusion case. And then I left. I did testify at it, but and then I left before the decision.
So when you filed the collusion case, it wasn't just about Lamar Jackson, correct?
We filed on behalf of quarterbacks.
It was behalf of quarterbacks. Was it specifically? It was Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson,
and Lamar Jackson.
Oh, it's just Kyler. I thought Russell Wilson was also in it.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was. Yes. So these are the quarterbacks because you're looking at.
Yeah, the way the grievance procedure works is you are allowed to file a grievance for almost anything, and you're focusing on what you have potentially evidence of. So it was, for the most part, pretty much a rifle shot towards quarterbacks' guaranteed contracts. And remember, there's one more step before Deshaun. Kirk Cousins gets franchised twice, and thanks to the collective bargaining agreement, the first time around he gets the average of the top 5, and then the second time he gets the average of the top 3. And then rightfully so, when he enters into the free agent market, he says, why should I take a contract as a free agent that's structured worse than the deal that I had when I was being franchised? So I honestly was surprised that we didn't see more guaranteed contracts after the Cousins contract. Then you fast forward to the Watson contract. Okay, high performer, didn't play for an entire year, gets a fully guaranteed contract. Well, okay, I mean, people might debate whether or not that's a good one or a bad one, but that's what the market bore. And so now you're looking at a marketplace where you've got 3 quarterbacks, 2 of which arguably are on their way to be Hall of Famers, probably first ballot Hall of Famers. And there's questions about what kind of contract they're going to get. So, when a question arises like that, and by the way, if you open up the CBA, the largest section in the CBA, I would argue, is about collusion. So it goes to the heart of our relationship. So I never shied away from filing grievances before because that's, I think, what a union is supposed to do. And then everything plays out the way everything plays out.
So for those who don't recall, is like really, I think what was a eyebrow-raising moment for a lot of people was Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, poised to supposedly have this new deal with the Ravens. They give him an offer that other teams can match. And
right.
No one inquires about Lamar Jackson, which is bizarre. It's like, wait a minute. He's in his mid-20s. He is an MVP. You would think somebody like that with his level of performance and what he'd already accomplished would be resetting the quarterback market, and none of that
or at
happens.
least indulging 7,000 telephone calls, right?
And suddenly you see in the media that there are reports that Falcons aren't interested. Like, people who clearly need quarterbacks are not interested in Lamar Jackson.
Well, once again, can't talk about the grievance, but that's all public.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that you had a number of people coming out, first of all, nobody contacts him. Then a number of people decide to go public.
By saying they don't want him.
To say they don't want him.
Which was very strange.
Again, and to me, it is a level of hubris that I found it stunning. I mean, you're sitting there with a lot of great athletes who are quarterbacks, right? I mean, and they're they're great athletes. How many of them are MVPs? And he has a non-restrictive tag on him where, okay, I mean, they could have come back and matched it or paid more. But the fact that no one reaches out to a transformational athlete, I've never seen that before. And as you said, then it's followed by, I'm not really interested. Well, once again, I have never really seen a moment where other owners and other teams were commenting on other players on other teams.
So quite a bit of reporting has been done since.
Since
you filed this, and obviously have since left the NFLPA, where we then discovered that there is this, your grievance was, 61 pages? The
decision.
The decision, was 61 pages. And there's all sorts of very juicy, interesting details. The biggest one is that there appeared to be, speaking of collusion, some kind of collusion between the NFL, or there was a confidentiality, not collusion.
Yeah.
It was a confidentiality agreement signed between the NFLPA and the NFL to not let out what I would think would be extremely valuable information, particularly if you're a union and you want to show your guys, like, hey, we got a big joker. Anybody who plays spades, we got a big joker because we have text messages, we have evidence that there are owners who were purposely trying to not fully guarantee contracts, purposely trying to set the market behind closed doors that you didn't know about. Now, since then, as a result, the person who replaced you,
Yep.
Lloyd Howe, he has resigned. I guess number two for
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way to put it.
Sure.
J.C. Treader, he is also
Resigned.
So now there's this void of leadership. Given everything that has happened that we have seen, if you're the players and you're looking at this, what are you thinking about the union? Like, why would the players even trust the union after this is all unfolded?
Yeah. Well, lots of questions. I think what the players, as players have done in history, the thing that they need to wrap their hands around is this is their union. There is no union separate from the players. Both I worked for them, the union presidents work for them. I don't think it's really. I think instead of looking at whether or not they should trust their union, I think that they need to engage in ruthless introspection about what type of union they want. And you and I beforehand were talking about the WNBA players union and the U.S. women's team union. I've worked with all of them. The one thing I can say about those two unions, every one of their members is invested in their union, and they take their duties with respect to their collective seriously. And I don't have a lot of explanations for what went on. I wasn't there. I wasn't a part of the search process for Lloyd. There's 100 or so union members. There's one voting member and 3 alternates for every team. That 100 or so group of people elect an 11-person executive committee, and their job is to hold the executive director accountable. And I think what has to happen in this void is I think people need to go back and understand why you form a union in the first place, and rise to the occasion.
But you even look at how Lloyd Howe, who replaced you, Lloyd Howe Jr., how he was selected was very strange to me. It was a very confidential process in which it felt like he was sprung on the players, and that they didn't get the benefit of figuring out or finding out who this guy actually is. And as a journalist, I have to say there were some disconcerting things in his background. The fact that he had been a part of this very sordid settlement involving a whistleblower for his company. The fact that he is a part of a group that is actually trying to buy into the NFL, which seems immediate conflict of interest. You have an executive director that is also trying to, or is also part of a group that is trying to buy, trying to gain access and become minority ownership in an NFL team at the same time. So that's why I asked you about.
Yeah.
This was very surprising, considering the shape that you left the union in.
Yeah.
How has all of this struck you?
Sadness. I mean, I think for any person, and again, I'm talking to someone who we have so many similar experiences. You work for a company for a long time, you're a part of it, you separate from it. There comes a time when you just emotionally have to divest yourself from it. And it's not a hatred or you've got some cross to bear. It's that chapter was that chapter, and you move on to a new chapter, and you can't really kind of keep looking over your shoulder about, hey man, I wonder what's going on over there. You just have to move on. And so, I had 14, almost 15 years of a lot of stuff, but I was always proud of what the players did. I ran for re-election. The only thing I can say with respect to the election you described versus I can contrast it to the elections that I had. I mean,
Your process was very different.
It was very different.
It was much more transparent. They had a closed process where no one knew anything, and I just didn't understand. Well, I have some theories about
Yeah.
why, but
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
I think, I ran for, when I came in 2009, that was a big election. I ran for re-election, I don't know, 3 times, something like that. Look, there were times when, I think all of those elections to a certain extent were chaotic, frenetic, messy. But democracy is supposed to be messy. And I look back on my elections, whether it was the first time or any of the ones going forward. And, I'm pretty sure that for the guys who went through it, I'm sure they would say, man, I never want to go through something like that again. Democracy is supposed to be messy. And I think that if you ever trade confidentiality and secrecy for some sort of, praying at the altar of efficiency, you can literally end up with the right answer, but somehow get the wrong result. And, look, I would never wish rep meetings, that we would have on anyone. They are not for the faint of heart. They just aren't. I mean, you've got 100 guys in a room. Everybody has an opinion. Guys tend to be very emotional. I tend to be, in their defense, I can be rather dogmatic and strident about things, and probably a little bit overly logical. But that sort of grist where it's uncomfortable, and yes, people get angry, and sometimes people get their feelings hurt, and it's certainly not efficient. It's not pretty, but we always handled our business. And, I even look back to the 2020 deal was highly contentious. Some players didn't want a 17th game, but they wanted all the things that came from it. Some guys didn't want to vote on the deal. Some guys didn't like some of the terms. Some guys did. And at the end of the day, the CBA, I think, is approved by 67 votes, but with almost an 80% voting rate. So I know a lot of people are like, well, man, 67 votes. That's just not a good endorsement of a deal. And I'm like, well, look, I don't know if we've had an election in the United States with 80% participation. It was messy. But I think it's okay for democracy to be messy. The things over the last few weeks have just, for the most part, been literally heartbreaking. The people that work at the union, it's a hard job. And most of those people took that job because they love it, and they decided that they were going to get paid less than they could anywhere else. I think about, Gene and the fact that during the 90s when the union decertified, and yet they were still filing these lawsuits for free agency from 1971 to 1993. Gene and 7 people, that was the entire staff at the time, they worked without pay. I think looking at this, it just seems to me that that right now the board has to decide what kind of union they want, and that has to start with what type of player leaders we want. And it's hard. I look back, that first executive committee for me was, Brian Dawkins and believe it or not, Mike Vrabel and Drew Brees and Kevin Mawai and Kevin Carter and, guys like Mark Bruner and Brian Waters and Dominique Foxworth. When I met those guys in 2000, and I guess the first time I met them was 2008, I was struck literally by how old they seemed. They just seemed like grizzled old men. They were probably, the average age was 27, but I think what made them so mature beyond their years is when you wake up one morning and the guy who's run the union longer than you've been alive is dead, and that a CBA war is on the horizon. I think those guys became older than their years and accepted a level of responsibility that should be a banner for what the guys have to do now.
getting back to your book for a second, I don't want to mischaracterize.
Yeah.
But it did seem like you had a bit of a disdain for Jerry Jones. Is that the maybe disdain's not the
Disdain's
right word?
hard.
Is that harsh? Okay.
No, I mean, disdain's harsh. I would say that Jerry is one of the more interesting characters I've ever met in my life. And I was a homicide prosecutor for 10 years. So disdain is hard, but, Jerry is a very tough person. I mean, tough.
Yeah.
And the way that, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the way that he runs the Cowboys is a emperor running the Cowboys. And I think Jerry and the way that he wants to run the league is no different. Interestingly, he and I almost never had a crossword. Except for a couple of times, but unlike, he never called me uppity, but wow, that's just, I didn't think I would work in uppity twice in this, but Jerry's just a very tough guy, and he almost literally wills things into existence, and so I'm always kind of fascinated by people like that because I'm a little bit like that. But also, I just am not going to let somebody run over our guys.
Well, I was, in particular, you wrote this, and I was thinking about this in light of his recent comments about Micah Parsons and Dak
100%.
Prescott. Right, where
I know a lot of this looks prescient now,
it
right?
It does. I was like,
I know.
Did you know?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
he's in a battle with Micah now.
Yeah, over his contract.
Over his contract.
He takes a shot at Micah, and then Dak Prescott just catches a straight as a result,
Yeah.
where he's just like, all right, listen, you might get hurt. It's just things you don't say.
It's things you don't say.
When you are in the process of a contract negotiation with your best defensive player. And I'm reminded of what you wrote about Jerry in Turf Wars, which I'm going to read back here now, where you said, and that when it comes to Jerry himself, black people can play for him, drive him around in his luxury bus, and clean the stadium and team facility, but lead with him, shape the league with him, attend owners' meetings, and affect policy and stand up to systematic failures with him. Those are the lines he will not cross.
100%.
And that is a very interesting characterization of him because he's obviously one of the most successful owners in sports history. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
No.
When you think about what the Cowboys are worth.
Well, and how he built it.
And how he built it, buying them for $140 million. It's one of the greatest investments ever
of all time.
Yeah.
And the way he operates it, right?
Yes.
I talk a little bit about going to that boiler room. The way that he thinks about putting butts in the seats and building a stadium that, everybody, remember when that thing went online, everybody was laughing about the size of his Jumbotron. Now everybody wants one.
Now it's the standard.
Yeah. And even his comments about, hey, look, we have owners in the National Football League who aren't driving revenue. And that's not good, D. But I guess, to me, it's one thing to rightly point out the things that he has done on the business side that are remarkable. But if you ignore the things that at least were obvious to me, I don't think you get a true picture of who they are.
Oh, and in fairness, one of the other things you wrote, which I thought was a very accurate description, you said that there's a limit to his views on equality.
Yeah, there are, and look, I think that piece of reporting that first came out with the Washington Post about, he's standing on the steps when they're integrating his high school. Jerry's comments about that weren't what you would have expected.
They weren't great.
Right.
They weren't great. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a certain level of, one other thing you got to remind me about Jerry, and I know it's going to sound incongruent, but he also makes me laugh. I mean, he's hysterical. I mean, I don't know whether he intends to be hysterical, but he's hysterical. But, when faced with when faced with the facts of where he was on that day, and you're given this opportunity to kind of explain why were you there and what you were thinking, it's striking to me that he didn't apologize, right? I mean, he didn't even try to kind of put a spin on it of, well, no, they weren't great. And I find it interesting that a person can make the conscious decision of, I don't have to say anything that makes you feel better. And that's the way he is. And to a certain extent, that's sort of the way a lot of the owners are. This is a closed country club where even if you have enough money, you're not allowed entry. And I think it has created my only way of describing it was a fiefdom, where they really, at least except for a couple of occasions, they bend the knee to no one.
That being said, and seeing how the financial dynamics are,
Yep.
seeing how the social dynamics are among the owners, will we ever see a majority black owner in the NFL?
I think the answer is yes, but I don't think that is going to be a bellwether for change. I really don't. I think this idea that somehow we are going to get a majority black owner and somehow we're going to fall into a post-racial world like many people thought we were after the president's second term. We didn't achieve a post-racial world, even though we had a black president for 8 years. I don't think anybody should hold their breath that we're going to achieve a racial harmonious NFL ecosystem if we have 5 black owners. I think it certainly has something to do with the color and the character of the person who takes that job. But remember, this is still an ecosystem that has to admit to itself that its own Rooney Rule doesn't work. I mean, you and I have been in this business forever. What rule does the NFL have that doesn't work? I mean, there's a rule about your socks. There's a rule about your jersey. Some players have rules about their weight. There's, all of the helmets are the same. Everything's the same. I mean, the rule book is literally one of the largest documents on the planet. And yet they created their own rule that hasn't achieved its own goal. And, I wrote an article for Yale. My only conclusion has to be is that's intentional. You wanted to call it a rule because now it sounds like something that's going to be enforced, but you have zero intention of actually following it. So I think the only thing that could lead to some sort of systemic change in the National Football League is what's brought about systemic change in the country. I mean, laws and legislation are not perfect, but I thought Lyndon Johnson gave the best speech a president's ever given about passing the Civil Rights Act. We have rules that made it easier, or let me flip it around. We have rules now that made it harder to discriminate against people of color and women and sexual choice. And what are we seeing now? We're seeing a rollback of the accountability structures. Well, the people who want to roll those things back, I'm sure they think a certain way, but they understand that was the catalyst for change. So, the National Football League exists. These teams exist in jurisdictions that have statutes that criminalize discrimination. I don't know of one state attorney general in any state where there is an NFL team who has ever opened an inquiry about whether there are discriminatory practices with respect to coaching hires. I mean, I don't know of a better prima facie case for discrimination by the NFL than their coaches' situation. And yet, for some reason, no one has ever opened up a civil investigation. Nobody's opened up a criminal investigation, and the law is there. But until someone believes that they're actually going to be accountable to something bigger than themselves, it's one of the lines I wrote in the book. If you could get away with anything, what would you do?
You think we will ever see fully guaranteed contracts in the NFL?
I think I think that...
As in that being the
norm?
The norm,
I
the standard.
do. I do.
Okay.
And I think it will be one of the interesting collateral impacts of NIL. And I think that what's happening now with players coming into the National Football League, the NIL system has I think rightfully allowed players to certainly use their name, image, and likeness, but I guess the sub part of it is it's made every player aware of their value. And it just simply means that if you're the starting quarterback of blah, blah, blah school that's a Power 4 school, man, it means there's a certain amount of money that is going to come your way. I think that mentality is what's going to change in the National Football League. That mentality that, okay, now I'm Joe Burrow or I'm Josh Allen or any one of these folks. At some point, I think those players have to say, well, wait a minute, why am I taking all the risk? I mean, when you look at first round draft picks, I mean, those contracts are almost virtually 100% guaranteed. If I were them, okay, you took a guy like Kirk Cousins, and Kurt's a fantastic quarterback, may not be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but that guy got 2 fully guaranteed contracts while he was
first ballot in the Finesse Hall of Fame.
100%.
As I say about my favorite Michigan State quarterback ever.
100%. And then he leveraged that into a fully guaranteed contract as a free agent. I think that it's the mentality that's going to bring that to fruition because, again, no CBA guarantees contracts. I mean, Larry Bird literally changed the ecosystem on guaranteed contracts, and they became custom. I think the mentality of players coming into the National Football League, aided by NFL, I think it's going to change that mentality. And I think you're going to have players who are going to say, I'm not coming. I mean...
because they can make millions where they are. Or just saying that, hey, the feeling...
If you're a free agent, okay, I'm not going to play. Right? I mean...
Oh, you mean people already in the league, not...
Correct.
Not the... Okay, gotcha. Right.
Correct.
Yes.
Because that's the leverage,
yeah.
Right?
If you're just like, I'm not going to even deal with you if you're not fully guaranteeing, if they have the leverage of performance.
And that was the leverage. I mean, you think about the leverage of Kirk Cousins, right? And you can talk about his performance as a quarterback either way you want, but his performance, for whatever reason, led the Washington team to pay him the average of the top 5 fully guaranteed, and then the average of the top 3 fully guaranteed. And you can make a pretty good argument that Kirk Cousins was not the top 3. That's what the market would bear. And I think he took that mentality into the free agent market and said, why would I take forget about the money, for how many dollars. Why would I take a contract that's structured in a worse way than when I was franchised? And by the way, you know who agreed to the franchise rules? The owners. They agreed to make them fully guaranteed. So why should a player walk into a GM's office and say, hey, I want a fully guaranteed contract, and then allow the GM to say, well, we don't do that? Well, you did it with a franchise tag.
One thing I notice, and this is something that was obviously recently in the news, is that in these, and I'm sure you noticed it too, being on the inside of this, that when there is labor tension between players and owners, the fans side with the owners, and it drives me crazy.
I know.
It drives me crazy. It does.
I know.
Sure, it drove you crazy.
It drove me crazy.
But we are recording this just a few days removed from when WNBA players All-Star Weekend, they came out
shirts
with the shirts, pay us what you owe us, and people lost their shit
Yeah.
about it. And even though people tried to lean into the excuse of like, well, the WNBA is not making money and this and that, you and I both know till you see it in the books. And everybody does their books differently. I tried to get people to explain this. Say most times owners want to do what?
Oh,
they want to show they're operating at a loss.
100%.
That's what they do.
That's what they do.
Yes,
that's what they do.
They try to convince you every time we're losing money.
Well, and I was in it for 14 years. I have yet to see an audited financial statement. They never produce an audited financial statement. So, yeah, look, I think that what the WNBA players not only did now, but what they have done, clearly makes them.
Like, how do they win the narrative? Are they going to? I guess should they even bother winning the narrative?
No.
More? Okay, because you've been on the inside.
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, when we're negotiating a deal, man, there's one chair that's empty, the fan. I mean, I don't want to break anybody's heart, but nobody in that room is like, hey, man, what does Bubba think? No one is spending that moment. And so I think the narrative is only important in one respect. I think it's important to make sure people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. But this idea that fan support is going to mean something in a negotiation room, I mean, don't overplay that hand, right? Because we all know one thing, at least when it comes to the NFL. Fans are going to watch. They're just going to watch. And, I don't get into arguments with people at bars to the extent that I used to. I used to pick every fight because it was funny. And
you're a lawyer.
And I'm a lawyer. It just kind of comes, somebody will say something crazy in a bar. I just don't think he's worth all that money. And, my response back was,
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. You play. But we all know you can't. So, okay. I mean, I might pay $5 to see if you can make it across the room, but, that's what the market will bear. So it doesn't matter. I think it's important for the narrative to so people understand why you're doing it and why it's important. But the proof is always in the pudding, right? And the way that the WNBA CBA is structured, it's that structure, at least in my opinion, that structure doesn't jive with where they are right now. It just doesn't. And I'm a big fan of revenue share deals. I mean, we talk a lot about NFL players and basketball players and hockey players and baseball players. Look, nobody should cry a river, right? I mean, for the most part, all of those players are getting somewhere close to 50 cents on every dollar they generate, which is, when you think about that versus everybody else working in America, if you're working at Amazon, you're not getting 50 cents for every dollar you generate, right? So, those deals are hard-fought deals. I think that the future of the WNBA now, especially as they approach this zenith, they need a fair revenue share deal. And this idea that we're going to create kind of something on the side and they're going to kind of do this thing, well, that needs to be over. I mean, I'm going to have it tough walking down the street in D.C., but, I went to the WNBA games in D.C., and there were more people there than the Wizards game. Just making an observation.
All right, don't get in trouble now.
Making an observation. I'm just making an observation.
Don't get in trouble.
But
yeah.
And so, you see a fever and a fact that, man, these people aren't showing up with like isolated ticket sales. I mean, they're showing up with season ticket purchases. And if I were, anybody representing their union, we would say, okay, let's find out how much money is coming in and let's see what our share is. I mean, and that's a fair question. And more power to them. I mean, I had the pleasure of working with them in the past and with the U.S. Women's National Team and the the NWSL. I can get myself in further trouble. Man, the women on the union side are serial killers. And I think that they approach it with a level of righteous ruthlessness that every union member has to approach it. And they understand the issues. I'm sure you've seen it too. I mean, it was a couple of weeks ago. I tuned in late, saw the end of a WNBA game, and then watched the post game press conference. And before anybody would ask a question or get an answer about what the score or how the game went, man, I saw two women go off about the structure of their CBA and how it's unfair and how they are united about getting a better deal. And I mean, as a union guy, I'm watching that like I'm nearly welling up. What? Because it's that post game conference, and let's just flip it around. How many times have you seen any male athlete post game start off the press conference with a CBA discussion?
Well, at least in the modern day, male athletes have the luxury of being treated a certain way.
100%.
So when you are always fighting for your dignity, always fighting for your respect, as the women are,
and that's why it's different.
That's why it feels
different. Because your back is always against the wall.
So they're like, what else can you do to me?
What else can you do to me?
I don't make enough money as it is. Like, what, you gonna take away what I got? Like,
as my mother would say, I'm about to pull off my shoe.
That is sort of that.
That's
mentality.
what it is.
That is their mentality.
And I think it look, it just necessarily is the way that a labor union should think, as opposed to, I think things are pretty good. How hard are we going to fight for the stuff we want? I mean, that's just a different frame. I mean, they're fighting for up until recently, they were just fighting for a livable salary. And I dig it. I texted Terry that night watching these two incredible women talk about their CBA structure. And what I love about it is, as a reporter covering it, you're captive. I mean, you're just,
yeah. I mean,
it's great.
I have tried to explain to people till I'm blue in the face, like, what this is really about. But I think they'll reach a deal. I don't think there'll be a lockout because there's just too much at stake on both sides. So I think they'll be fine.
I would hope.
Yeah, I think they'll.
I would hope. I mean, I do know. I mean, things.
But they ain't backing down. So if they're
not backing down,
if the owners are thinking like, oh, they'll never let up. You don't know who you're dealing with. You do not know who you're dealing with.
And I think the that ability to demonstrate that before you get into the negotiation room. I was always trying to explain to my guys. Sometimes they think it's some sort of magic words that you say at the negotiation table. No, your deal is inextricably tied to how much leverage before you walk in the door. That's it. I mean, no one is going to come up with something magical, except maybe the secret insurance policy. But nobody, for the most part, is going to come up with... I implore
everybody, read the book. You'll find out about the secret insurance policy, which is one of the great big joker moments of all probably in NFL history, which leads me to sort of my next to last question here. Sure. And that is, when you look back on your 14 years with the NFLPA, what sense does it give you? Like, how do you feel about do you feel accomplished? How do you feel about the work you were able to do?
I'm really proud of the work we did. It was without a doubt the hardest thing I've ever done. I never thought it was going to be that hard. I really didn't. It personally pushed me to a place where, at times it's a place where I wish I hadn't gone. But it taxed me in a way that I never thought I would be. I learned a lot about myself. It forces you, at least for me, it forced me to come to grips with this idea of what does it all mean, and how does it all fit. And I'm thankful that I got there, that it just wasn't one more job or one more one more stop, along the way. I look at our institutions, and one that I revere the most is the press, because it is the fourth estate. And I think we find ourselves, when things aren't terrible, that perhaps we don't think how precarious things like free speech and a free press are. And then when things get tough, and you see people literally going out of their way to try to destroy something like newspapers and journalists and targeting journalists, you realize, oh, well, wait a minute, this is where this whole thing fits. I'm glad that after the 14 years, I understand where unions fit, and where personal responsibility fit, and where our understanding of our own unique journeys, whether you're an immigrant or whether you've fled the Jim Crow South, where it all fits. Because I think that if the converse to that is, if you allow yourself to simply be in a world where you're just constantly being entertained by it, it's not meaningful. So I'm really proud of what we did. I'm really proud of the people I worked with. I have 10,000 regrets. There's all sorts of things I wish I would have done differently, but there's very few things that I would change.
All right, now this is where we make some headlines.
All right.
All right. So, I end every podcast with what I call the messy question. But in your case, because
all of it's messy,
because you're D. Smith, and the wealth of things that you dropped in your book Turf Wars, which comes out when?
August 5th.
August 5th. Okay.
August 5th. And I got to do the audiobook.
Oh, we'll talk off air about that.
Okay.
Because
it's a thing.
It is.
I'm still in therapy.
I can relate. just know that. All right, so I have what I would call for you a messy question.
Yeah.
Lightning round.
Go.
All right.
Go.
Sneakiest NFL owner. I know they all are to some degree.
Jerry.
Cheapest NFL owner.
Oh my God. Mike Brown. Not even close. I mean, that's like I don't even know. By the way, no one's going to be surprised by that, right?
No one. Literally nobody.
No one. The guy gave me a stack of Hard Knocks tapes on VHS.
Wait, what year was this?
I think it was 2010. I'm not kidding. Once again, didn't even make the book.
So, why?
I met with him, and it was over, and then he had this stack of VHS tapes on his desk, and he goes, "Hey, D, this is my gift to you." Right. Yeah, okay.
Man, that might be worse than uppity. It might be worse than that. Hey, which owner would you guess probably cheats the most at golf?
Oh. That'd be a good question. I'm going to have to go, that I think would, I'd have to go with Tepper. I mean, anybody who would throw a drink on his own fan. Right. I mean, it's like, it's your own stadium.
Owner of the Carolina Panthers.
Like,
yeah.
like why?
All right.
Why?
The owner you most like to get drunk with.
Once again, that's going to be a tie between Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones.
I would have guessed Jerry would have been number one.
Jerry is hilarious.
He seems like that kind of guy.
The stories are off the chain.
Yeah. I would have said Robert Kraft, so gentlemanly, kind of.
And
he has a gentle demeanor.
And I guess that's why Robert is just a pure gentleman.
Yeah. Which you write about extensively in the book, about the ways in which he has the gravitas and everything.
The fun drinking with him would be it kind of strips away a little bit of the formalism. And one thing I learned from him is he's one of the few owners that actually thinks large about the league. And that was, I wouldn't have seen that.
And finally, the owner you trust to actually do the right thing.
Robert. I think that very few of them have gone through such a long run at the NFL where they have come away with an understanding of, first, we're all kind of blessed to be in this ecosystem, right? And I think he was one of the few people that understands that even though the thing has just been a juggernaut, that to pretend that this thing can't be toppled, that it can't be eroded from within, that there could be a problem that destabilizes the business model, all that's folly. And I think that's right. And I think he's probably one of the few that actually gives that a certain amount of thought, that we're going to have our dust-ups, but this thing might be more precarious than we think, and we all have to exercise really good judgment. He's probably it on that front. But between that and a funny story with Jerry, man, nobody makes you laugh like that guy.